The island of Sodor had many visitors, and the Fat Controller had scheduled more trains. Gordon, the big engine, had to work harder than ever before. "Come on," he called to the coaches. "Come on, come on, come on. The passengers rely on me to be on time." Whenever Gordon finished one journey, it was time for another to begin. "Never mind," he puffed. "I like a good long run to stretch my wheels." Even so, the Fat Controller decided that Gordon needed a rest. "James shall do your work." James was delighted. He liked to show off his smart red paint and was determined to be as fast as Gordon. "You know, little Toby," he boasted, "I'm an important engine. Everyone knows it. I'm as regular as clockwork, never late, always on time." "Says you," replied Toby. Just then the Fat Controller arrived. "Your parts are worn, Toby, so you must go to the works to be mended." "Can I take Henrietta, sir?" "No. What would the passengers do without her?" Toby saw Percy by the water tower. "Don't worry, Toby," said Percy. "I'll take care of Henrietta until you get back." Soon Toby was out on the main line. He clanked as he trundled along. He's a little engine with small wheels. His tanks don't hold much water. He had come a long way and began to feel thirsty. In the distance was a signal. "Good," he thought. "There's a station ahead. I can have a nice drink and a rest until James has passed." Toby's driver thought so too. Toby was enjoying his drink when the signalman came up. He had never seen Toby before. Toby's driver tried to explain, but the new signalman wouldn't listen. "We must clear the line for James with the express. You'll have to get more water at the next station." Toby clanked sadly away. Hurrying used a lot of water, and his tanks were soon empty. Poor Toby was out of steam and stranded on the main line. "We must warn James," said the fireman. Then he saw Percy and Henrietta. "Please, take me back to the station. It's an emergency." Henrietta hated leaving Toby. "Never mind," said Percy. "You're taking the fireman to warn James. That's a big help." Henrietta felt much better. James was fuming when he heard the news. "I'm going to be late." "My fault," said the signalman. "I didn't understand about Toby." "Now, James," said his driver, "you'll have to push Toby." "What, me? Me? Push Toby and pull my train too?" Grumbling dreadfully, James set off to find Toby. He came up behind Toby and gave him a bump. "Get on, you!" James had to work very hard. When he reached the workstation, he felt exhausted. Some children were on the platform. "Coo," said one. "The express is late and it's got 2 engines. I think James couldn't pull it on his own, so Toby had to help him." "Never mind, James," whispered Toby. "They're only joking." "Ha, ha," said James.
Thomas the Tank Engine was feeling very happy. His blue coat shone in the sun, he was right on time, and all around his branch line, the countryside seemed prettier than ever before. Beep, beep. Good morning, Percy, he whistled. My branch is the pride of the line, wouldn't you agree? Yes, Thomas, of course, but what, Percy? Out with it. Well, there is another engine with a famous branch line, too. Who? Where? His name's Stepney. He's far away, but Sir Topham Hatt says he may visit us. When? Oh, someday. And Percy hurried away. Meanwhile, Stepney was puffing steadily along his line. It isn't very long, and that made him feel a little sad. Later, he saw Rusty. The little diesel had helped save Stepney from scrap. Everyone's been so kind. But my railway is so short, and I do miss a good long run. I think you should tell Driver, too, replied Rusty. I'm sure he'll understand. Stepney soon discovered that indeed he did. Do you know, Stepney, I feel just the same way. That evening he had exciting news. Guess what, Stepney? Sir Topham Hatt has invited us to visit the other engines on his railway. Manager agreed. It'll be a really long run to get there. Oh, thank you, sighed Stepney. They set off next morning. By now, all the other engines were talking about Stepney. He runs a famous branch line. Did you know that? Said Percy. Thomas was feeling a little jealous. Huh. It may be famous, but my branch is the first on the line. Everyone knows that, too. And he huffed away to fetch his coaches. Look, squeaked Percy. Why have they all come? There's no train yet. But Percy was wrong. The signal dropped, and from far away an engine whistled. Here he comes, yelled Douglas. Stepney puffed proudly through the junction. I hope you'll meet Thomas, too, said Edward. You both have branch lines to be proud of. Then Stepney set off to help Duck shunt coaches in the yards, and they worked happily together all afternoon. At last, Thomas arrived. Sorry, can't talk. It's time for my last branch line train. Mustn't be late. He was hardly out of sight when the engines heard shouting at the station. Moments later came the alarm. Stop all trains! The signalman answered the telephone. A special, is it? I see. Thomas was impatient. Why are we waiting? My passengers are being delayed. Sorry, Thomas, said his driver. We're being shunted to allow another train to pass. Soon they heard an unfamiliar puffing sound. There was Stepney with his headlamp swaying and whistle blowing. He gathered speed and disappeared. Well, bust my boiler, said Thomas the Tank Engine. Next morning he was still fuming. Shunted, and on my own branch, too. It's a disgrace. I'm sorry, said Stepney. I was a special. Why? An important passenger arrived just as you left. He ordered a special train, and Duck let me take it. We had a splendid run, but, finished Thomas, it can make an engine nervous not to know the line. Exactly, said Stepney. You're such an expert. Thomas felt much better. He couldn't be cross anymore and began telling Stepney all about his branch line.
Thomas the tank engine was grumbling to the other engines. I spend my time pulling coaches about ready for you to take out on journeys. The other engines laughed. Why can't I pull passenger trains too? You're too impatient, they said. You'd be sure to leave something behind. Rubbish, said Thomas. I'll show you. One night, he and Henry were alone. Henry was ill. The men worked hard, but he didn't get better. He felt just as bad next morning. Henry usually pulled the first train, and Thomas had to get his coaches ready. If Henry is ill, he thought, perhaps I shall pull his train. Thomas ran to find the coaches. Come along, he fussed. There's plenty of time, they grumbled. Thomas took them to the platform and wanted to run round in front at once. But his driver wouldn't let him. Don't be impatient, Thomas. Thomas waited and waited. The people got in. The guard and station master walked up and down. The porter banged the doors, and still Henry didn't come. Thomas got more and more excited. The fat controller came to see what was the matter, and the guard and the station master told him about Henry. Find another engine, he ordered. There's only Thomas, they said. You'll have to do it then, Thomas. Be quick now. So Thomas ran round to the front and back down on the coaches ready to start. Don't be impatient, said his driver. Wait till everything is ready. But Thomas was too excited to listen. What happened then, no one knows. Perhaps they forgot to couple Thomas to the train, or perhaps the driver pulled the lever by mistake. Anyhow, Thomas started. As he passed the first signal box, men waved and shouted, but he didn't stop. They're waving because I'm such a splendid engine, he thought importantly. Henry says it's hard to pull trains, but I think it's easy. Hurry, 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 he puffed, pretending to be like Gordon. People have never seen me pulling a train before. It's nice of them to wave, and he whistled. Peep, peep, thank you. Then he came to a signal at danger. Bother, he thought. I must stop, and I was going so nicely too. What a nuisance signals are. He blew an angry peep, peep on his whistle. The signalman ran up. Hello, Thomas, he said. What are you doing here? I'm pulling a train, said Thomas. Can't you see? Where are your coaches, then? Thomas looked back. Why, bless me, he said, if we haven't left them behind. Yes, said the signalman. You'd better go back quickly and fetch them. Poor Thomas was so sad he nearly cried. Cheer up, said his driver. Let's go back quickly and try again. The station, all the passengers were talking at once. They were telling the fat controller what a bad railway it was. But when Thomas came back, they saw how sad he was and couldn't be cross. He was coupled to the train, and this time he really pulled it. But for a long time afterwards, the other engines laughed at Thomas and said, Look, there's Thomas, who wanted to pull a train, but forgot about the coaches.
One morning, Gordon was in the yard taking on a large supply of coal.
That's the third load of coal you've had today, Gordon, said James. Some might say you're being rather greedy. I'm an important engine, replied Gordon. Important engines need plenty of coal, but I doubt if you would understand that, James. James snorted and went about his work. Later, Gordon was taking on water from a standpipe because the water tower was under repair. I wouldn't drink too much of that water if I were you, Gordon. It might give you boiler ache. "Pah," said Gordon. "What's this, educating Gordon Day? First James, now you, Duck. Big engines have big needs. Little engines are just annoying."
"Don't say I didn't warn you," laughed Duck. Later, Gordon steamed into the yard at the big station.
"That's what I need," exclaimed Gordon.
There, emerging out of the sheds, were 2 shiny tenders.
"Now, if I had 2 tenders," said Gordon, "I wouldn't need to stop so often, and I wouldn't have to listen to silly little engines." "Those tenders belong to a visitor," replied his driver.
Diesel sidled up alongside. "Everyone knows that tenders are a mark of distinction, but I'm afraid that no amount of tenders will save you in the end. We Diesels are taking over, and we don't need tenders to make us important, not even one." Gordon was most upset. He was feeling just the same next day.
"I'm not happy."
"I know," said Duck. "It's boiler ache."
"It's not boiler ache," protested Gordon. "It's..."
"Of course it is," interrupted Henry. "That water's bad. Have a good washout. Then you'll feel a different engine. Your boiler must be full of sludge."
"Don't be vulgar,"
huffed Gordon. He backed down onto his train, hissing mournfully.
"Cheer up, Gordon,"
said Sir Topham Hatt.
"I can't, sir. Is it true what Diesel says, sir?"
"What does he say?"
"That Diesels are taking over." "Don't worry, Gordon. That will never happen on my railway." "One more thing, sir. Why did the visitor have 2 tenders?"
"Because he lives on a railway with long distances between coaling depots." Gordon felt better. But Henry started complaining. He banged some cars angrily.
"I always work hard enough for 2, he puffed. "I deserve another tender."
Duck whispered something to Donald. He was going to play a trick on Henry. "Henry," he asked, "would you like my tenders?"
"Yours? What have you got to do with tenders?"
"All right," said Duck. "The deal's off. Would you like them, Donald?"
"I wouldn't deprive you of the honor,"
replied Donald. "It is a great honor," continued Duck thoughtfully, "but I'm only a tank engine. Perhaps James might—"
"I'm sorry I was rude," said Henry hastily. "How many tenders have you, and when could I have them?" "I have 6, and you can have them this evening." "6 lovely tenders," chortled Henry. "What a splendid sight I'll be."
Henry was excited all day.
"Do you think it will be all right?"
he asked for the umpteenth time. "Of course," said Duck. "They're all ready now." The other engines waited where they could each get a good view. But Henry wasn't a splendid sight at all. His 6 tenders were very old, dirty, and filled with boiler sludge.
"Had a good washout, Henry,"
called a voice.
"That's right. You'll feel a different engine now."
Henry was not sure, but he thought the voice belonged to Gordon. James is a mixed traffic engine. He can pull both freight cars and coaches. He's proud of his smart red paint, and so is his driver. Everyone says you brighten up their day, James. One morning, James whistled loudly at the other engines. Look at me. I am the smartest, most useful engine on the line. Rubbish, replied Thomas. We're all useful. Sir Topham Hatt says so, and he's head of the whole railway. You know what, James? Added Percy. What? Replied James. You're getting all puffed up. James huffed away. Later, he was still boasting. I'm the pride of the line. I saw you pulling freight cars, snorted Gordon. You're only a goods engine. I pull coaches, too. Not as much as I do. But Sir Topham Hatt has plans for me. James was only making this up, but Gordon believed him. What plans? Wait and see. Oh dear, he thought. Now what'll I do? Thomas was shunting shining new coaches. Good morning, James. Are those coaches for me? Asked James hopefully. No, these are for Gordon's Express. I'll fetch your freight cars next. But James was going to play a trick on the other engines. Actually, Thomas, I'm taking the coaches. Sir Topham Hatt asked me to tell you. What about the cars? Asked Thomas. Give them to Gordon. Come on, Thomas, said his driver. Orders are orders. So when James's driver returned, James was coupled to the coaches and he puffed away. Thomas returned with the freight cars, and a few minutes later, Gordon arrived. Where's the express? Thomas told him about James, and so here are your cars. Gordon was very cross, and so was his driver. Wait till Sir Topham Hatt hears about this. Meanwhile, James was enjoying himself enormously. What a clever plan! What a clever plan! He chuffed. Then he saw Sir Topham Hatt. Some jokes are funny, but not this one, James. You have caused confusion. Yes, sir, said James. You will now stay in your shed until you are wanted. The other engines teased James. I wonder who'll be pulling the express today, said Gordon. I expect it'll be you, replied Henry. James is stuck in the shed for being silly. James felt sad. Next morning, he went back to work. Hello, whistled Thomas. Good to see you out and about again. I'm sorry I tricked you, said James. Are these my cars? Yes, replied Thomas kindly. They are pleased to have you back. James set off to the harbor with his train of freight cars. He bustled about all day, pushing and pulling them into place. Time to go home now, James, said his driver at last. No cars or passengers, just we two. But his driver was wrong. Excuse me, called a man. I have a meeting with Sir Topham Hatt, and I mustn't be late. May I ride back with you? Of course, replied James's driver. Then he whispered to James, This gentleman is a railway inspector. James was most impressed. He steamed along the line as smoothly and quickly as he could. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting on the platform, and the railway inspector greeted him warmly. This clever engine gave me a splendid ride. You must be proud of him. Yes, indeed. Once again, you are a really useful engine. Sir Handel is very proud of his big, sturdy wheels. They have broad tires and hold well to the rails, but they are unusual. One day, the other engines wouldn't stop teasing him. "Look at his steamroller wheels," they joked. "Be quiet," snorted Sir Handel. "You're jealous." "Don't worry," soothed Peter Sam. "The engines all teased me about my special funnel until they learned how useful it is." "Did you hear that?" huffed Sir Handel. "My wheels are special, like Peter Sam's funnel. I can go faster than any of you." Skarloey had a plan to make Sir Handel see sense. "With your grand wheels, Sir Handel," said Skarloey, "you're just the engine to tackle George." "Who's George?" "That steamroller over there," replied Skarloey. "Listen." The steamroller was making rude remarks about the engines. "Railways are no good. Turn them into roads. Pull them up. Turn them into roads. Railways are no good. Turn them into roads. Pull them up. Turn them into roads." "Don't worry," said Sir Handel. "Leave him to me. I'll send him packing. George will soon get a run for his money." Later that morning, George was at the level crossing. "Huh. You're Sir Handel, I suppose." Sir Handel was standing no nonsense. "And you, I suppose, are George?" "Yes, I've heard of you." "And I've heard of you. You swank around with your steamroller wheels, pretending you're as good as me." "Actually, I'm better. Goodbye." George chuffered on, fuming. Later that day, Sir Handel brought a special load down after the last train had gone. When he had reached the road, he saw George traveling home. Sir Handel tried to attract his attention. "Beep, beep, beep." George took no notice. There was barely room to pass. Sir Handel was cross. "Get out of my way, you great clumsy road hog." "I don't move for imitation steamrollers. You don't know the road. Get out of my way." Then there was trouble. "Ah!" cried Sir Handel. "That was your fault." "No, it wasn't. It was yours." Everyone was arguing about who was to blame. "Hello, hello, hello," said a policeman ominously. "And what's going on here?" This made everyone stop arguing. They set to work clearing up the mess instead. Next day, the workmen put up a fence between the road and the railway. Then they went away, taking George with them. Sir Handel thought he had made George go away. He talked of nothing but steamrollers. "Oh dear," whispered Skarloey. "He's worse than ever. I'm sorry my plan was no good." "Never mind," said Rusty. "We'll think of something else." But they had no need to do that. Some boys arrived instead. They pointed to the engine and cried, "Look, here's Sir Handel. He tried to race a steamroller, but the steamroller nearly beat him." Sir Handel never mentioned steamrollers now.